All right, we're set and ready to go. Jerry's got us going now. Had a little technical difficulty right there, but thank you for all of you being here, those of you at home and those of you who are here with me in person. Let's go on to Genesis chapter 9. We're going to hopefully finish up this chapter tonight. And while you're opening up with Genesis chapter 9, I want to open us up now with a word of prayer. Gracious, loving Heavenly Father, once again, thank you for this time. Thank you for this time of study, but most importantly for being one with each other, with you. And through the power of your Spirit, open us up. Give us new meaning. Give us new understanding to this great, well-known part of the story of Noah, dear God, and his family. And I just ask you to reveal yourself and let us find you once again in the midst of all this so that we can grow closer in our relationship with you. And we ask this now in your holy, mighty, and very precious name. Amen. All right, so you remember we finished up last week. We were looking at verses 8 through 17 and how God is establishing his covenant. And it's the covenant where he takes the initiative and does all the work. And we have the rainbow and the multi-purpose, uses of the rainbow now, that it's God's reminder, but more importantly, it's our reminder. We look at the rainbow and we remember that God remembers. And we also talk about the fact that this is his promise. He's never going to destroy the world with a flood. But more importantly, this is his sign, his personal sign of love, grace, and mercy. And greater still, that he will never break his promise concerning this flood. So now we continue on to the last part here of Noah's story. So join me at verse 18. We're going to finish this up. The sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. Noah, a man of the soul, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine and became drunk, and he lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew that his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. Lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. May God make space for Japheth, and let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. All right, so are you ready? Are you ready to get into this last part here? Well, the thing is, as we now enter into the last part of chapter 9, we come to an event, a specific moment that actually has consequences that end up affecting the entire world. And we know this because of what it says there in the last part of verse 19 concerning Noah's sons. And from these three, the whole world was peopled, or some of you may have the word populated, or something like that. Oh, what now? Overspread. Overspread. Okay, that's a unique word. I hadn't heard that one yet. I didn't find that one. I found peopled and populated, but not overspread. But I like that one. The thing is this, though. As we look at the opening, actions, though, of this event, starting now in verse 20 and 21. As we look at the opening actions of the event, there are people. There are people who, first off, they want to put some of the blame on Noah for what happened here, okay? And the question is, why do they want to put some blame on Noah? Because as we read, Noah became what? Drunk from drinking the wine. But is this actually the case? Does Noah have any blame with this? Well, join me there at verse 20. Now, right off the bat, what are some things that we now know about Noah? The first thing we learn about Noah, he is a man of the what? A man of the soul, which means that basically we now know what Noah's occupation has always been. He's always been a what then? A farmer. He's been a farmer. But being a farmer at this point, he's actually doing what? He's going back to doing what God first called man to do, to tend the garden or to work the land. So not only are they starting over as being the first people, they're going back almost to the original commandment. Work the land and tend the garden, okay? But we also see that as a man of the soul, that Noah then plants a what? A vineyard. He plants a vineyard, okay? But what should stand out about this vineyard? There's something very specific in verse 20 that we need to take note of about this vineyard that Noah plants. There's one word in there that it should stand out. It should be that we have to take notice of.
He was the first?
He was the first. Or better yet, he is the first man to ever do this. Is this the first vineyard? Because two questions come up. First off, does this mean that Noah was the first man to ever plant a vineyard? Or does this mean that Noah was the first man to do this following the flood? Well, see, the belief is this, that Noah was actually doing this for the very first time. This is the first time that a vineyard has ever been planted and cultivated. Two reasons. First off, there are botanists, other scientists. They have determined that grapes and grapevines, vineyards, they originated in the land of Armenia, which is exactly where? It's where the ark settled. This is the land that ark settled after the flood. This is where botanists have determined that grapes and grapevines originated, okay? But once again, if you go back to the original Hebrew text, when you look at the way it's translated, what it means is that Noah began to plant. But also, if you go a little deeper, it shows that it supports the belief that this was something new, brand new, first time, for not just Noah, but for the world, when you go to the original text. So right off the bat, we have to understand, this is the first time this has ever been done, okay? But then look at verse 21. But as I pointed out a few minutes ago, what is the one thing concerning Noah that everybody, though, wants to focus on concerning this part of the story? They want to focus on the fact that he got what? Drunk, okay? It's what we've all heard. Noah got drunk. If you're like me, that's what I heard in Sunday school, vacation Bible school, okay? And as a result, some people want to say that Noah has now become a what? An alcoholic. They think that. But think about it for a moment. Throughout the flood story, what is the one thing that has consistently been pointed out concerning who Noah is? If you look at chapter 6, verse 8, we found out right that Noah found what? Favor. You're right. Favor in the sight of the Lord. If you look at chapter 7, verse 1, you read where God is speaking, God says to Noah, "For I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation." And then in chapter 8, verse 1, we learn about the fact that Noah, as he comes out of the ark, he performs this sacrifice. He builds an altar, and the thing is this, he did it on his own. God did not tell him to do this, which shows that Noah is also a man of faith. And so we know, because of the kind of man he is, we know then that he is a faithful man, he is a righteous man. He has found favor in the sight of God. And because of the kind of man Noah is, this brings us back then to the original point. Should some of the blame for what happened be placed upon Noah? Has Noah now become a drunk? Well, let's go back to what we actually know concerning all this. Once again, this is the first vineyard, okay? We know that planting a vineyard is a new experience for Noah. He's the first one to ever do this. And from what we read, first off, there's no disapproval from God in him planting a vineyard. God has never once said to him, stop growing grapes. Or that from God's point of view, that growing grapes would cause Noah to fall into an act of sin. So right now, we know it's all right for him to plant grapes. But the thing is this, since Noah is the first one to ever plant grapes, Let's also say then that Noah is the first person to discover a way to do what now? So, well, no, hang on just a minute. First, if I don't go, I'm getting here, but hang on a minute. The first thing is, he's the one that discovers a way to press and squeeze the grapes, okay? Now, what do you first get when you press and squeeze grapes?
Juice.
You get juice. You get grape juice. And the more the grapes that he grows, the more grapes he can press to make the grape juice. And they're experiencing this, okay? But let's say that there is so much grape juice that Noah has to build containers to hold that grape juice. And they're working with it. And they discover that over time, what ends up happening to that grape juice that's been stored? Like Beth Allen said, it ferments and then it becomes what?
Wine.
It then becomes wine. Now look again at verse 21. We also learn something else about Noah. How much wine did he drink?
Must have been a lot.
No, look at verse 21.
He drank of the wine.
Drink of the wine. It should say some of the wine. So he drank some of the wine. So this tells us what? He did not drink all of the wine. He doesn't consume a large amount of the wine. He drinks a portion of the wine, okay? And so as Noah tastes the wine for the first time, like you said, maybe they had the grape juice. They discovered this process on their own, or maybe by accident. There's been a barrel left over to the side. They kind of forgot about it, and they discover they can continue doing other things with it. They are smart. They recognize the fermentation process, okay? They drink it, and they discover, it tastes good. He discovers that it tastes good, but he still does not know what.
That it will affect him.
Yes, right. He does not know the effect it can have on him. Which means that what? Noah did not intentionally get one.
Well, they used to drink it for water.
Right. But remember, we're talking about the very first time.
Yeah.
We're not talking about how, even if they say you go over there today, don't drink the water, type stuff, like in Mexico. Drink the wine. But remember, they don't know this. So Noah does not intentionally get drunk. But more importantly, there's no mention in the rest of Noah's story of him ever having any kind of drinking problem. So this means that Noah is still a what kind of man? A righteous man. Noah is still a righteous, faithful man who still finds favor in the eyes of God, okay? So the bottom line is, does Noah deserve anything? If you look at it like this, because that key word, first, and it's been proven that this was the first time any of this ever done, they don't know what the results are. And according to the Hebrew text, he doesn't drink a lot. He just drinks some of the wine. They don't know how it's going to affect them. God is not going to condemn him for that. But now we get to verse 22. We now come to the one, though, who is to blame for everything that happens. Now, as we see, Noah's son Ham saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Now, from this statement, some people right off the bat, they want to then make this statement. They want to make this comment. Where was the great sin? In Ham simply seeing the nakedness of his father. Since Noah cannot be blamed for what he accidentally did, can Ham also be blamed for accidentally seeing or coming upon his father's nakedness? There are people that want to point that way. But what we have to understand, that the problem is not the fact that he saw his father's nakedness. The problem is found in the possible two ways, or in an actual twofold way, what the problem is that Ham caused, okay? Twofold thing. First off, when he sees his father, Ham made no attempt to do what?
Cover him.
To cover him up. He makes no attempt to cover him up. Instead, Ham does what? Okay, but he does more than just tell his brothers. He goes and he tells his brothers what? What he saw. He goes and tells his brothers what all he saw. And this is First off, the one possibility of what made Noah so angry when he woke up and discovered what Ham had done. You see, to the Hebrew people, to have your private parts exposed and looked upon is considered to be very shameful. Old Testament scripture now teaches that the body is holy and should be covered. You can find it in Exodus chapter 20, verse 26, the book of Leviticus 18, 1 through 30, and then in the prophet Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. But in Genesis, a Bible commentary in the Wesleyan tradition by Wilbur Lynn Williams, my #1 commentary, I want to share with you what he wrote about this. Nakedness after the fall could no longer be countenanced or tolerated, for the evil heart always seeks an unbridled expression of sex rather than containing it within marriage as God intended. And he then points to God's plan of marriage found in Genesis chapter 2, verses 24 and 25, where the man and the woman become one. But the bottom line is this: they know they're naked, but they are not ashamed of it, okay? And so for Ham, what he should have done is not just immediately cover his father, he also should have done what? Not told a soul. Because in telling his brothers, and you got to imagine they're in a tribal area. They got everybody, try keeping a secret in the church, folks. You can't do it. You can't keep a secret in the church. You can't keep a secret in a close-knit family. Somebody's going to tell somebody. So the bottom line is this: what happened is that Noah got mad because everybody knows that he had been laying there naked, and Ham's running around telling everybody. That's one possibility. But let's look at a second one here. You see, it is believed that what Ham did, though, was this: that he saw his father and that he enjoyed it. That he enjoyed the sight of his father's nakedness. And as a result, Ham once again did two wrong things. First off, that Ham did have an inappropriate sexual relationship with his father, okay? And then Ham did what? After the inappropriate relationship, Ham then goes and does what? He tells about it. He doesn't just say, hey, our father's naked lying in there. He begins to brag about it. And once again, everybody else finds out about it. And because of this act of sin against his father, this is why Noah then becomes so upset with Ham for what he has done. But let's look at something else here. Let's look at a third thing within all this. Because when we look at Noah's reaction to what Ham did, what should stand out? Look at verse 24 and 25. There's something about Noah's reaction that should stand out to us. Look at 24 and 25. That when Noah woke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he says what?
Cursed be Ham.
Okay, he doesn't say cursed be Ham.
Yeah,
he says cursed be, okay. So the question now becomes this: why does Noah curse Ham's son Canaan when it was Ham that committed the sinful act upon him? Well, maybe the answer's in Leviticus. Look at Leviticus chapter 18 with me. Go to Leviticus chapter 18. It's a whole chapter where God spells out carefully the law concerning sexual relations, okay? So flip over to Leviticus chapter 18, and we're going to pick up with verse 6. Leviticus 18, verse 6. None of you shall approach anyone near of kin to uncovered nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. All right. You see, it's very possible that when Ham came by Noah's tent, that instead of looking upon his actual father's nakedness, committing a sinful act with Noah, that as he's going by, he also notices maybe Noah's wife also had some of the wine, along with Noah. And she too became drunk and passed out. And instead of what Ham did was to look, it's not looking upon his father's nakedness. Instead, he chooses to look upon his mother's nakedness, which according to Old Testament scripture, in reality, to look upon your mother's nakedness is to look upon what? Your father's nakedness, because back then, the wife belonged to the husband. So to look upon a wife's nakedness was in reality to look upon the husband or the father's nakedness. And in looking upon his mother's nakedness, he then commits this sinful sexual act of incest with her. And if this is the case, it would explain not just one thing that occurs in the story, but actually two things. First off, if it was their mother who was naked, it would explain what Shem and Japheth did there in verse 21. What is it that they do when they come in?
They walk backwards.
They walk backwards and they do what?
Carry the blanket.
And they did what? There's three things. They carried the cover in, but they did it walking backwards, and they did what?
They covered their bodies.
No, they turned their heads away. See, they did it like this. They walked backwards, turning their head away. So the thing is, if it's their mother's nakedness, that would explain, because the thing is, if it had just been their father, they could have gone in and just covered him up and just not said anything, and it would have been okay. But if it's their mother's nakedness, that's why they enter backward and turn their heads. But it would also explain why Canaan is the one who is cursed and not Ham. You see, Canaan could have been the one who was cursed because he is not only Ham's son, but whose son also could he be? He's not just Ham's son. He could be, if it's his mother.
Could be Noah.
No. It'd be his mom's son.
I thought it was talking about Canaan as a nation.
No, Well, don't jump ahead. Don't jump ahead. The bottom line is this. If this is the way it is, and the thing is, this is not just, I've discovered this not just in my reference books. I have a pastor friend that I also was talking to about this, and he was watching it turns out he was watching last week a podcast that's done by a Hebrew priest. And he was talking about this, and this is what he said that the Hebrew text interprets. That it was his mother that he saw and had sex with her. And that why Canaan is cursed is because it was not just Ham's son, but it's his mom's son too. That was created this way. And this would explain why Canaan is the one who's cursed. That even though he had nothing to do with all this, it was his birth that brought shame upon Noah and the family. And that Canaan, even though he had nothing to do with it, if you look, Noah curses Canaan how many times? Yes, he does it 3 times. He curses him 3 times. But there's one thing that can bring this into question, okay? In the Bible, especially the Old Testament, first off, it's not uncommon for the children and coming generations of somebody to be what? Cursed. It's not uncommon for this to happen. The best example I can think of is, remember when God brings the people out of Egypt? They get to the edge of the promised land and they're afraid they won't go in. So God does what? He says, all of you will have to die, which included the children at the time and everything. A whole generation of people had to die off before the next group could be able to enter into the promised land. They wandered the wilderness for 40 years. It's not unusual, okay? And so what we're talking about here, more than likely, is not just one person. We're talking about descendants. Talking about the descendants of Ham. And to know that your descendants are to be cursed in this way would actually do what to somebody? Probably hurt them even more. So it's possible that in reality, Ham is the one who was cursed. So it would mean that Ham did not have an incestuous relationship with his mother, that instead he did what we've always come to believe that he did, and that was to have that with his own father. and that he committed that act with Noah. Because in his own way, Ham is being the one that's cursed. He's just pronouncing it upon the descendants of Ham, okay?
Because he saw his nakedness, what tells us that he had sexual relationships with him?
Well, it's just way it's way it kind of gets interpreted. We just, like I said, and the thing, that's why I said the very first thing I told you, it didn't have to be with a sexual relationship. It could have just been that he saw it, remember, and it's a shame to be seen that way. And that Ham, all thing he had to do was just cover his dad up, go out and not say a word. Just go on and live his life, and that would have been fine. Where he messed up was he went and told his brothers, more than likely, that spread through the entire neighborhood. Then, around all the other tents and things like that. So that's also a very possibility. But the other possibility is that to look upon that nakedness like that, and for Noah to react the way he did, that there's also the assumption that something bad happened, that something came about. But the thing is, kind of looking at, finishing this up, if we look at verses 26 and 27, see, now we come to in the midst of Canaan being cursed 3 times, we also have the blessings given to the other 2 sons, Shem and Japheth. And it's from this that several questions continue to, come up as a result of the 2 blessings. First off, since we're told in verse 19 that it is from Noah's son that the whole earth will be populated or peopled, okay? Which nation do these brothers end up representing? Well, in the case of Shem, it's believed that it is the Hebrew nation that comes from him. Now, the New Revised Standard reads, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem." But how many of you got NIV? It has a better translation. "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem." Okay? That's a better translation. So since God is Shem's God, then of course he's immediately linked to the Hebrew people. But the strongest connection is found in Genesis chapter 11, verses 10 through 26. Here you have the descendants of Shem. And when you get to the last verse, verse 26, you're given Shem's connection to Abram, who later becomes Abraham, the father of the Hebrew nation, okay? But the biggest question comes from the ancestry of Japheth. It's believed that his descendants end up becoming the nations of the people of the European nations, which also include pre-Europe, which would have been Rome and Greece, okay? So he ends up forming basically the Gentiles. But there's one thing about the blessing given to Japheth that should stand out to us. We are told that the children or the descendants of Japheth are to live where? In the tents of Shem. So the question is this a sign of family? Which it is. A sign of family living together. So this means that the descendants of Japheth also make up the Hebrew nation. That is very possible. That they all make up one nation. Or is this simply a call for us to live as people in the way that God originally created us, to be one people throughout the world? We don't know that for sure, because the bottom line is, who pronounces the curse and the blessings? Who pronounces this? Does God pronounce it? Noah does. So it's Noah that's saying this. We don't know God's exact intent with it. But there's always that possibility. But now let's look at the last part, because in the midst of all this, we now have the Canaanites. This is what Beth Ellen was talking about. With the descendants of Ham, we know this group. They're the Canaanites. Okay? Now, we know the Canaanites are. First off, they're the people, they're the nations that we talked about in Joshua. Remember, when they first go, they won't go in, and then they come back, and then the thing is, the Canaanites are made up of all of these different nations, okay? They're nations that are living in the promised land when God brings the Hebrew people in to claim it as their new home. These are also the nations that eventually become what then to the Hebrew people? As they come in and take the land, they either kill them off or they take them as what? As slaves. Remember the story of Joshua? There are the nations that are either they're killed off completely, or they are taken as slaves, which goes with the curse that Noah pronounces upon these descendants of Ham, these people, okay? But see, worse off, these are the people that become a thorn and a hindrance to the Hebrew people. Because see, these are the people who also encourage what among the Hebrew people? They end up encouraging what?
Intermarriage.
Well, intermarriage, which was against them. But also, how about they encourage worship of idols? They're the ones that brought idol worship to the Hebrews, along with various forms of sexual misconduct. They're Canaanites. So this is what they are. When it says, "Cursed be Canaan," in reality, it is more about the nations of the Canaanites that will be cursed one day. And as we see, when they take the promised land, they are either killed or they're made slaves. But because it all goes back to Ham, and if he did commit one of these two inappropriate acts, either with his father or with his mother, see, they also bring all this sexual misconduct into, because they bring all these people in that cause the people to continue to fall away from God. So anyway, and then of course it ends with Noah living his total 950 years, and then he dies. And so we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up with chapter 11, looking at the Tower of Babel. We'll look at chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, and then go over to chapter 12 to the call of Abraham. So the thing is, I want to thank all of you at home. We're not going to meet for 2 weeks. We're going to take the last 2 Wednesdays of this year off for the holidays. But we will be back here on Wednesday, January the 5th. So I hope you at home will join us again when we come back. So till then, take care. God bless and Merry Christmas. Goodbye.